And we'll get started on our the developments and things that have happened here over the past, as I said, 4 weeks since the last presentation was done. I think it was on the 19th of January. So we have the events for the week ending the 25th of January, and then the events of the 2 weeks that ended on the 8th of February, and finally the events that have ended for this past week. We do have some additional and supporting articles. Got a full slate there from top to bottom. They're all new additions. Some of the ones we got highlighted basically cover subject matter that's sometimes repeated by some of the others that are not highlighted. They're all worth your while to take a look at, and some of the subject matter will be covering today. Couple that we won't be, but is certainly worthy of your interest to take a look at is right at the bottom there. Why is the Earth's magnetic North Pole on the move? That's interesting. And the other one here too is third up from the bottom, China's massive desert project about to change the world. And that highlights all we hear about China is the pollution that's happening there because of the coal plants and everything, coal-fired plants. But what's happening kind of behind the scenes that, 1/3 of China is desert. And they've used a lot. They've used thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres of that desert to put up solar panels and collect solar energy as well as wind farms. And they've got energy they're hoping to harness there to feed energy to millions of homes. Anyway, interesting stuff. But we'll get right on it here and start with the latest events. And the first one I'm going to do is taking it right from the top. Trump's plan to clean out Gaza could upend Jordan. And this was taken from a publication called Foreign Policy, Foreign Policy, February the 9th, 2025. And the article says, Donald Trump has threatened to cut off aid to Jordan and Egypt should they refuse to accept Palestinians from Gaza. The U.S. president demanded the allies accept refugees to pave the way for a U.S.-led redevelopment of the war-torn Gaza Strip into the Riviera of the Middle East. Jordan and Egypt, both recipients of significant U.S. military and economic assistance. I'm not sure about Jordan, but I know Egypt receives $1.2 billion annually. So they receive this significant U.S. military and economic assistance, and they have so far rejected the suggestion that Palestinians could be relocated to their countries. If they don't agree, I would conceivably withhold aid, Mr. Trump told reporters in the Oval Office on Monday evening. The U.S. president made the threat on the eve of what is likely to be a tense meeting with Jordan's King Abdullah, who has condemned any attempt to annex land or displace Palestinians. The Jordanian monarch is expected to tell Mr. Trump that his redevelopment plan would spur radicalism, spread chaos in the region, and jeopardize peace with Israel. We know that visit is a thing of the past. It has taken place. And Mr. Trump was very direct with his plans. He doubled down on them when the king was there. The comment here from Brother Andy Walton is that when Israel was created in 1948 by the United Nations, many Palestinians were displaced when Arab forces rejected the new nation. Jordan absorbed the majority of these Palestinian refugees. Jordan has an estimated 55% to 70% of the population identifying as Palestinian by origin or nationality. The King of Jordan's own wife is Palestinian. Despite all this, Jordan has remained an ally of America, but this alliance is now being tested to the maximum as Trump wants Jordan to house the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. In the Bible, Jordan is made up of three ancient tribes: Ammon, Moab, and Edom. In Zephaniah 2, we read of Gaza being emptied of people. We also read in the same chapter that Moab and Ammon will become like Sodom and Gomorrah. In Psalm 83, we read that Moab and Ammon are part of the inner ring war. And quoting from Zephaniah 2, verse 4 and 5 and 8, Gaza will be abandoned, Ashkelon left in ruins. I will destroy you, and none will be left. I have heard the insults of Moab and the taunts of the Ammonites, who insulted my people and made threats against their land. Therefore, as surely as I live, declares the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, surely Moab will become like Sodom, the Ammonites like Gomorrah. So it is certain that if anybody has seen the Palestinian refugee camps in Jordan, they're massive and house hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. And it's politically unstable for the king of Jordan to accept anymore, because it could upset the balance of power there, and he could be out of power depending on how the vote would go. So it will be interesting to see how this develops as we go into the future on it. Go ahead from the Richard Hall. Welcome.
I was just going to say it's also kind of interesting that no other Arab countries will accept the Palestinians either. Like where where Egypt is bordering Gaza, they have like a big border wall that's constantly guarded so that Palestinians can't come across. And it's kind of funny because I think most of the Arab world knows like what would happen to their country if they let a bunch of Palestinians in, and it would be just kind of destruction to their country, which is exactly why Jordan probably doesn't want to upset the Palestinians that are living in Jordan.
Yes, very true. And as I said, it's going to be interesting to see how the outworking of this goes as you go into the future. We know that Trump seems to be very determined to make this happen one way or the other. And so it will be interesting. Just going down to the next one here, which is on the same subject. King of Jordan refuses to back Trump's Gaza plan. And this is from the Telegraph, February the 11th. These are all fairly recent articles. King Abdullah of Jordan has refused to endorse President Trump's plan for Gaza during showdown talks at the White House. Speaking with the king in the Oval Office on Tuesday, Trump reiterated his plan for the United States to own the Palestinian territory after the war. He repeated his expectation that Gaza's 2 million inhabitants would be moved to Egypt and Jordan to make way for what he described this week as a real estate development for the future. The king, aged 63, has previously said he rejects any moves to annex land and displace Palestinians, and pointedly refused to agree to Trump's plan when asked to comment inside the White House. He said he would do what is best for his country, adding that Arab nations would come to Washington with a counterproposal. He said, quote, "Mr. President, I think we have to keep in mind that there is a plan from Egypt and the Arab countries. We are being invited by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia for discussions in Riyadh." He said, "The point is how to make this work in a way that is good for everybody." So the comment on this news story is that Saudi Arabia will host the leaders of 4 Arab countries at a summit on February the 20th to discuss President Donald Trump's proposal for a U.S. takeover of Gaza. The leaders of Egypt, Jordan, Qatar. Well, we remember that Qatar has been one of the major movers in the peace settlement and the hostage release lately. So Qatar and the United Arab Emirates will attend the summit. Saudi Arabia has repeatedly called for a Palestinian state existing alongside Israel. These Arab nations will put their own proposal to Trump following this meeting. The Bible is clear that some Palestinians in Gaza will be removed and replanted elsewhere. Joel 3 says they are sold to the Sabaeans. This is the area of southern Arabian Peninsula, very much in the area where the Houthis are. To appease Trump, they may propose something, but relate it back to a Palestinian state. And he quotes here from Joel chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. Behold, I will raise them out of the place whither ye have sold them, and will return your recompense upon your own head. And I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the children of Judah, and they, that is the children of Judah, shall sell them to the Sabaeans, to a people far off. For the Lord hath spoken it. So this is a prophecy that probably we haven't looked at a whole lot, but does bear some thought, because I don't know, I'd have to check history, I'm not sure whether this has ever happened before. One thing about it that I think is interesting to contemplate in all of this, we know that, and we've often talked about it, that there being a time of peace prior to the coming down of the King of the North, a time of peace for Israel. And I guess we might say, what better time of peace could it be afforded than to have the United States as a neighbor in Gaza, having ridded it of terrorists and have settled it there for the rich and the famous. Another one here that just shifts the narrative a little bit. This is about Iran. And it's threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz. Now, what is the Strait of Hormuz? Well, we'll just bring up a map here so you can see it. It's here's Iran on the to the north of this strait, and of course Saudi Arabia to the south. We got nations here like Qatar. We just mentioned Qatar. They've been very instrumental in the negotiations for the Gaza. And on the other side here, we've got Iran. And then the very little strait here that goes straight through the tip of the UAE here, United Arab Emirates here, the UAE, I should say, and that they're threatening to close off. So Commodore Ali Reza Tangsiri, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, the current commander of the Navy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is sending a defiant message to the U.S. following President Donald Trump's threat to ban Iran from exporting oil and to impose economic sanctions on Iran. In response, Tangsiri said that Iran has the military ability to block the Strait of Hormuz, but that it has not yet done so because it is still using it. He claimed that the decision to block the Strait of Hormuz is up to Iran's top leadership, and the naval force will follow the orders given to it. Tangsiri noted that, and quote here from what he's saying here, the Islamic countries in the region can ensure the security of the Persian Gulf through cooperation and joint maneuvers And Iran, for its part, maintains a continuous naval presence in the ocean to provide security for Iranian ships in international waterways. The comment on this story is that tension is building as Iran races to build a nuclear bomb. UN nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi said on Friday that time is running out as Iran has ramped up enrichment of uranium. U.S. intelligence agencies recently warned both the Biden and Trump administrations that Israel will likely attempt to strike facilities key to Iran's nuclear program this year. Iran is upping its threats again, as it has done previously, to close the Strait of Hormuz if its nuclear sites are attacked or it is pressured too much. Isaiah 21 speaks of Iran doing exactly this. Blockading or creating a siege, that's used in Bible terms, of this narrow stretch of water between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the Persian Gulf. It is through the Persian Gulf, which goes out through the narrow Strait of Hormuz, that 15% of the entire world's oil and gas is shipped. Isaiah 21 says that the siege of this sea comes at a time so shocking for the world that Isaiah, who saw the vision, was totally dismayed by it. In the quotes from Isaiah 21, verses 1 and 2, the burden of the desert of the sea, or the message to the desert of the sea, the Persian Gulf. As whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it cometh from the desert, from a terrible land. The grievous vision is declared unto me. The treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Go up, O Elam, or southwest Iran, by the Persian Gulf. Besiege, O Media. All the sighing thereof have I made to cease. So again, another thing just bears watching, and I'm sure that Mr. Trump is not one to back down easily on that. So it's we will see who blinks first. And going to, for time purposes of time, we may come back on this if we have time, but I'm going to go down here to what just happened a couple of days ago. The U.S. Vice President issues a blistering attack on Europe's leaders. You know, and we know that, I guess as a lead up to this story, we know that in Bible prophecy, there's really no linkage between the King of the South, which is in prophecy we believe to be the U.S., Canada, Britain, and so forth. There's no linkage between them and the nations of Europe, such as NATO and the UN. And so it's very possible that Mr. Trump was put in, God is overseeing he sets up kings and takes down kings, as Daniel says, and he's overseeing this. And Mr. Trump is perhaps in there for this very reason, to make the disconnect between the King of the South and the European nations. So the Vice President stuns the Munich conference with blistering attack on Europe's leaders. And this is from The Guardian, February the 14th, 2025. We've got 2 or 3 news stories here from The Guardian coming up. The U.S. Vice President questions whether European values are worth defending as he rails against the threat from within. The U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has launched a brutal ideological assault on Europe, accusing its leaders of suppressing free speech, failing to halt illegal migration, and running in fear from voters' true beliefs. In a chastising speech on Friday that openly questioned whether current European values warranted defense by the U.S., he painted a picture of European politics infected by media censorship, cancelled elections, and political correctness, arguing that the true threat to Europe stemmed not from external actors such as Russia or China, but Europe's own internal retreat from some of its most fundamental values. He repeatedly questioned whether the US and Europe any longer had a shared agenda. What I worry about, he said, is the threat from within. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, the Vice President had been expected to address the critical question of the Ukraine war and security differences between Washington and Europe. So the comment on this by Brother Andy Walton says the speech by the US Vice President yesterday totally shocked Europe's leaders meeting in Munich. J.D. Vance basically said that Europe was its own problem, not Russia, not China. He criticized Germany for blocking right-wing groups from entering politics. Germany prevents mainstream parties from engaging with the far-right parties owing to their Nazi origins. But Vance said there was no room for such barriers. He also questioned the continued U.S. backing of Europe. With Bible in hand, we can expect the U.S. to weaken its support of the EU, which in turn leads to a new resurrected Holy Roman Empire to emerge, led by Germany. And this is all detailed in Revelation 17 about the 10 horns which thou sawest. He says are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but received power as kings 1 hour with the beast, the resurrected Holy Roman Empire, which we believe to take place after the Battle of Armageddon. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. And that's from Revelation 17. And I think maybe we have a little bit of space here between maybe we might call it the traditional interpretation of that verse with how Brother Andy sees it, but typically we see that as taking place after the Battle of Armageddon and being and these beasts being these European powers, the 10 toes being overcome in the final battle with Christ and the saints. But we know that we feel that they are definitely involved in the first battle. They come down as a secondary power with the King of the North, but do survive to fight again. From the hand raised of Richard Hall.
I was just gonna kind of add a little bit more into this idea of like the U.S. and Europe separating. It's certainly not a new idea that the U.S. wants to stay out of European politics like it did in World War I and it did in World War II. The U.S. has very historically kind of seen itself as not really wanting to be involved in Europe in a lot of ways, except for like basically since the end of World War II, it has been because of the Cold War. But this idea of like the separation of U.S. and Europe is an idea that was happening even when Biden was still president, where people like Macron or Ursula von der Leyen, who is the EU chief, are saying like we need to stop relying on the U.S. Because we can't expect them to look after all of our problems over here, and they're unreliable to begin with. And Macron was saying like we need to form a EU army, which is just a conglomerate army of all of the European nations and things like that. And that was before J.D. Vance gave this speech. And even in Trump's last time he was president, was saying we should pull out of NATO and all this kind of stuff. And I did just see a thing that Ursula von der Leyen, who is the EU chief, suggested to stop the 3% deficit cap on EU nations. So if you are an EU nation, there's these rules in place essentially that you're only allowed to go into a deficit worth 3% of your national GDP. And she was suggesting that they get rid of that rule simply so that European armies can rearm and make themselves large again. And there's a few countries that are already doing it. Like Poland has been growing its military over the last 5 years a lot, but even further back than that. And Poland has the third largest land army in Europe. It's only after Germany and France. And it's continuously growing every year. And so is little countries like Romania or all the Baltic states or Finland, all like seriously growing their militaries. So it's definitely something that's interesting to watch, and it's not. I would say that this kind of idea of the U.S. and Europe separating is something that's more pervasive than just J.D. Vance doing a speech and suggesting that that Europe and the U.S. are not aligned anymore.
Yes, thanks for that very significant comment.
Brother Gordon also has a comment here.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, just further on that sort of angle, I just saw where Zelensky had suggested that you might have to start looking to the EU for military support, which is a signal to the US that they're gonna not, rely on them so much. So, and the other thing I would say is perhaps it might take quite a while to see that come fully around. So that could allow for the return of Christ and the coming down of Russia in between while that is still developing. Just a suggestion anyway.
Yes, it's both good comments there, and for sure, I think I was thinking about that as well as going through this. We're seeing here shades of 1938, or certainly shades before 1942, and before Pearl Harbor. It seemed to take that it shocked the U.S. into getting involved in the war, but prior to that, as Brother Austin was saying, they were quite reticent to be involved in that. Go ahead there in the hall.
Just kind of on that too, if you look at some pre-World War II things, one of them was Germany, just before World War II, took over several smaller areas of different countries. So they kind of basically annexed Austria, or it became very much like a German protectorate sort of thing. And they also took an area of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. And there was a British Prime Minister, and I can't exactly remember, Neville Chamberlain, flew over to Germany, just before World War II, and got Hitler to promise, I won't take any more land, everything will be fine. And then when he flew back home, he had a piece of paper in his hand, and he got out of the plane, he waved it around and said, "I have achieved peace in our time." And then it was 1 year later, Germany, invaded a whole bunch of area. And you kind of wonder if there's similar things with the negotiations that are going to go on between Trump and Putin in Saudi Arabia. Is Trump going to walk out of that, let Russia kind of take part of Ukraine, and then kind of wave a white paper and say, there, we have peace, and not expect any more to happen? It would be an interesting parallel to see if that occurs.
Yeah, that peace cry and then sudden destruction happens. It's almost like a proverb. I mean, we're expecting it to happen in the upcoming future, very near upcoming future, I think. But it has happened before too, and there's been a peace cry and sudden destruction comes. It just seems to be a event and the result of it. Okay, we'll move on here to. Thank you for those comments. By the way, it's very good to go through those things. So what I want to look at here now, and I want to go into one. This is one I've added here, and there's some things about this that will involve. I think we just had a BCAF meeting last night, and there's some things here that those members of the BCF will need to take notice of here, I think. Authoritarian regimes around the world cheer on dismantling of U.S. aid. And we got here in a picture, an image of Africa. And I'm just hard so you can see it, the picture of Africa and the three trade hubs there in which China and Russia and the U.S. are vying for, for domination in. And that's what this is kind of all about. And this is from The Guardian as well as the last story we had. And so we'll just enlarge this a bit. So it says that Moscow has welcomed the impending dissolution of U.S. aid, joining a chorus of strongman leaders declaring victory over an organization they have long portrayed as a vehicle of American political interference. Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova on Thursday described U.S. aid as, quote, anything but an aid, development, and assistance agency, and instead branded it a, quote, mechanism for changing regimes, political order, and state structure, unquote. For authoritarian leaders worldwide, the agency's dismantling represents a potential retreat of American democratic influence. But the question of who can fill the void is still up for grabs. The agency's annual $1.9 billion in food aid and crucial health initiatives are now in flux, and it is unlikely European governments will fully compensate for the lost support. For that reason, some analysts and experts are looking at China, warning that dismantling the agency could hand China a major strategic victory in its quest for global influence, particularly in Africa and South America, providing China a perfect opportunity to renew soft power projects and get back on track to trans-global leadership. Soft power refers to the gaining of power by the administration of health and welfare and money to developing nations, and it adds influence by doing that. And that, so rather than going in and domineering by sheer power and military, this becomes a way of gaining that same end through the use of soft power. And I'll just finish this before I take the comment here. And so I just want to comment here that a few weeks ago, we were commenting about the advancement of Russian and Chinese interests into the cultural and political affairs of African and Pacific Rim countries. And just to bring that to mind again, this was the few weeks ago that we were on that, and it's going to have to go down here to the bottom here. Yeah, here's the graph here that we were looking at that time about where has Russia waged disinformation campaigns in Africa, and the same thing we were talking about at that time that China was doing very much the same thing in waging disinformation campaigns, and they were being they competed against by the U.S. administration through U.S. aid. That was the counteracting influence. And wow, how things have changed almost overnight since this was back just in December. And now we see a total turnabout. And as we say, we were commenting then about the advance of Russian and Chinese interests, but we know that the Bible predicts that Russia will advance into North and Central Africa and thereby compete with and ultimately reduce the influence of the King of the South in those areas. And it's got $1.21 billion of aid to Egypt, and so it's going to influence. The King of the South is very powerful in that area of Egypt. We must remember that this host nation was the host for the king of the south, called then the Ptolemies, and that was Egypt, and that at some point the king of the north will come down and will occupy Egypt, along with other African nations, as it positions itself for the Armageddon conflict. So, Egypt is in a state of flux right now, because of the billions of dollars going into it. It is still kind of a member of the King of the South, but the withdrawal of U.S. aid is going to greatly strengthen Russian and Chinese influence, even in Egypt. And we are aware of the prediction of the ships of Tarshish being destroyed by an Eastern power. Today we see the King of the South creating this vacuum, which will no doubt be filled by Northern and Eastern powers. And we just quote from a couple of passages, Daniel 11:42 and Psalm 48. It talks about the King of the North will stretch out his hand against the countries. The land of Egypt shall not escape. Libyans and the Cushites, Northern Africa, shall follow in his train. The kings assembled, we read from the Psalms, they came on together. As soon as they saw it, they were astounded. They were in panic. They took to flight. Trembling took hold of them there, anguish as of a woman in travail. By the east wind, Kadam Ruach, which means eastern power, you shattered the ships of Tarshish. So there's definitely some thin things to watch there. It's right now it's just in the kernel, but how that will play out as time goes on, and there's definitely going to be a vacuum created there, and who will fill it? We have a hand raised at the research hall.
Yeah, I just had a comment, and then Brother Glennon has one as well. It's kind of interesting to see the change in the way that these like little third world countries will view the superpowers of the world, and how that could like very easily align them one way or another. So if you think, for example, of like Panama, because Panama was a place that Trump was just talking about. Panama was receiving support from China to kind of build infrastructure in its country, to receive support and things like that, and they were going to become part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is kind of an idea to like establish a global trade route through all these countries. And China, I mean, was essentially like buying influence in Panama in what it was doing. However, if you were living in Panama, that would appear like, oh, my roads are now paved, or I now have a new hospital in my country. Like that, it's perceived as a net benefit to you. And then you have like what happened like last week or 2 weeks ago, where Trump and the new foreign secretary basically said, if you don't cut your ties with China, we are going to invade you and take you over and like reassert our dominance in Panama. And Panama was like, yeah, okay, we won't deal with China. But to the average person who lives in Panama, what does that look like? It kind of appears like U.S. is a mobster, and China and Russia are actually the ones who could potentially be helping your country by giving you things for infrastructure. So now you just think of like that one situation in Panama, and now imagine that's happening in almost every single country that was receiving U.S. aid, where all of a sudden U.S. has cut you off completely. Who are you going to view as the favorable partner to ally yourself with? And it's going to be whoever can support your infrastructure in your country and your citizens. And they don't really care who that is, because when you're poor, you don't exactly care where your money is coming from. You just care that you now have a new hospital where previously you did not have a hospital, or you now have a road that's paved where previously it was just dirt and potholes. So it's interesting because a ton of these like small countries in the world that were receiving US aid, it's not just that like China and Russia will now have to like come in and assert their dominance. All these countries will voluntarily flee in terms of their alliances to any other major power that's willing to offer them what the US was offering them. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to think about and to watch of what small countries are actually doing that? And what kind of influence does that get Russia and China throughout the world, and how does it play into who is supposed to be allied with them in the final days? Brother Glennon also has a comment here.
Just in addition to what Brother Austin's saying there, when he talks about a new road being formed or new economic venture, particularly in the sort of countries that we're talking about, that's the difference between the average man coming home and putting food on the table for his children, or having to say to them, sorry son, sorry daughter, we're going to have to make ends, we're going to have to try to make a meal out of something you find in the backyard. It's not, I have to go from a 3-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom house. But it's a very strong influence. The comment I was going to make, though, is related to this soft power. Kind of almost sounds like fake power. It doesn't mean that at all. When you look at what Trump is doing now, when he's saying to Egypt, you will take Palestinian refugees, he's saying to Jordan, you will take Palestinian refugees, what is his, sorry for the pun, his trump card? His trump card is, we're going to pull aid if you don't do this, so you will do it. These countries are in a situation where aid has they've become so reliant on US aid that they can't hardly imagine ever having that dry up, if you will. And so it's soft power in the sense that you don't get it by military means, but it is very real power.
Yeah, that's good comments, and it is interesting to compare soft power with military power, and one is by force and the other is by influence, goodwill, and influence, and it's always a contest as to which one is the more effective, because depending on what the desired outcome is. And when that soft power is withdrawn, that's the issue that is being seen throughout the world now. And you have the authoritarian powers that such as Russia and Belarus and others that had welcomed this, won't have, there's I guess doubt about whether they would actually be able to fill the vacuum. And so in comes China, and China's already operative in a lot of these. And I just wanted, we note here that there's 3 hubs. One is headquartered in Accra, Ghana, the other in Pretoria, South Africa, and the third one is in Nairobi, Kenya. And these are the hubs for what's being affected right now by the withdrawal of the U.S. aid and the possible filling of the vacuum by China and or Russia. And it's interesting in this light, and this is where I was talking about the kind of my apologies to the BCAF as we had our meeting last night, and I kind of came across this afterwards. But I just want to play just a short clip here about this, and this is kind of how it's affecting Kenya. And I'll just, it's about 2 minutes, I think, here.
The system has been hit hard by the USA's foreign aid freeze, with 35,000 workers now out of work. Non-government organizations are also raising the alarm about the fate of over 70,000 patients on ARVs who will be affected by the closure of 150 clinics offering HIV and AIDS management services. At the same time, government has now been challenged to bridge the gap left by the USA foreign aid freeze and save thousands of Kenyans from either losing their lives or regress in their treatment for HIV, AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis. Brenda Wanga reports.
Weeks after the USA slammed the brakes on foreign aid globally, the impact of that freeze in the Kenyan health sector is beginning to crystallize.
Over 150 clinics have been forced to close, affecting more than 72,000. And again, I repeat, affecting 72,000 people who rely on antiretroviral therapy. The freeze has also seen the healthcare workforce decimated, with 35,000 men and women losing their jobs. While the U.S. government announced a waiver on life-saving activities, non-state actors in the healthcare sector say this has provided little relief and left out critical areas in the health interventions.
The children. When we miss a chance of testing a child and putting them on treatment, we can lose them in the first year of life. If we miss a chance of making sure that we stop the vertical transmission from the mother to the child, that means we are giving that child a lifetime of living with HIV. That is 70 plus years of the government paying for ARVs.
That means that the patients who are likely to have had TB have not been tested because of that lack of that support. So what does that mean? That we have patients who have TB but have not been tested. So they're living among us and likely infecting others because of lack of that support.
In the aftermath of the aid freeze, the government has pledged to ensure continuity in the affected programs, but non-state actors now want less talk and more action.
But ever since the order came, and we know the impact of job losses, we know the impact of commodities we've lost, and we know the impact of interference and disruption that has resulted, we have not seen official government position commenting on this matter. And we have not.
Well, I think that's probably as far as I want to go with that. It gives the story there of what's happening, and I guess a lot of the closures of these clinics don't specifically affect our brothers and sisters there who live in the more populated areas. These are a lot of the ones that are affecting people coming in from the Sudan, and they're in northern Kenya and are affected by a lot of these diseases like tuberculosis and HIV. But if the vacuum there has to be filled in the meantime by the Kenya government, how will that affect SHIF, the money going to the hospitalization, the new hospitalization plan, and so on? And those things, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But as I said, it was something that we probably, if I'd have known about earlier, would have had it to at least just bring to our notice for now and monitor as things develop and see how it works out. But it's no small thing for it to be affecting 72,000 people who may be having to live and work amongst other Kenyans that could become affected by that if these clinics have been closed down. So it's a little bit off topic of the current events, but still it's something I think that is of interest to us. So the next, we're just going to go down to the next one down here, and one interesting headline that caught my eye here was the U.S. seeks to rename the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And this is from the Middle East Monitor, February the 7th, 2025. U.S. Republican lawmakers in both the House and Senate on Tuesday introduced a bill seeking to rename the West Bank, quote-unquote, Judea and Samaria, which is the term used by Israeli occupation, and we might say it was also the term used of them in Bible times. The bill was introduced following an order signed by President Donald Trump upon taking office to lift the sanctions imposed by the outgoing administration and President Joe Biden on settlement officials. Republican senators led by Tom Cotton and Claudia Tenney demanded U.S. government departments refer to the area inhabited by nearly 3 million Palestinians as Judea and Samaria in official documents. Cotton argued that the U.S. should, quote, and stop using the politically charged term West Bank, unquote, asserting that, quote, the Jewish people's legal and historic rights to Judea and Samaria go back thousands of years, unquote. According to them, the term West Bank is a confusing and geographically illogical concept, as Judea and Samaria is located in eastern Israel. The comment from on that story is by Brother Andy Walton. He says, when you look at Israel, it seems odd that the eastern half of the land is called the West Bank. It is called this because it is the West Bank from Jordan's perspective. And we might say it's also the West Bank of the Jordan River. The territory first emerged in the wake of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War as a region occupied and subsequently annexed by Jordan. Jordan ruled the territory until the 1967 Six-Day War, when it was occupied by Israel. Israel refers to this area of land as Judea and Samaria. If America changes the name to Judea and Samaria, they are effectively saying the land is Israel's, not Jordan's. President Trump says he will make an announcement about this area within the next 4 weeks. Ezekiel 38 says that when Russia invades, they come against not the West Bank, but the mountains of Israel, this area. It says, after many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword. It's gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, Judea and Samaria, which have been always waste, but it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. That's from verse 8 of Ezekiel 38. So it's very significant that these developments are taking place now prior to the invasion by the King of the North, because it is true, it's not coming against the mountains of Palestinians, but against the mountains of Israel. And the area of Ephraim is well known as being, anciently being the mountains of Israel.
Brother Glennon has a comment here.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying Bethel and Ai, which is where Abraham lived, where he gets the promises after Lot leaves him, and where he looks on Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed. It was quite a common area for Abraham to have been in, Bethel and Ai. I believe that's all in the West Bank, isn't it?
It is, yes.
It comes right up even to Jerusalem.
Pretty close, yeah. It comes up to where Samuel lived, Ramah. That's kind of the dividing line there. Ramah is in Israel territory, and Bethel, which is a few miles north, is in Palestinian territory.
Yeah, and Ezekiel 38 talks about the people that have been brought back from all places being on the mountains of Israel. And the fact that they've used this very confusing term, West Bank, for a long time means that certainly it flew under my radar that this is speaking of the mountains of Israel, and probably true for other Christadelphians as well. But yeah, it does kind of underscore how misleading that term is, but also how significant an event it is to see Israel asserting and consolidating control over that area, which they did take in the '67 war. Israel took that over in the '67 war, but it was always sort of, particularly from powers outside of Israel, considered contested land, and I think was quite used in sort of land for peace concessions. So this is really significant, especially since that verse talks about peace and safety and the mountains of Israel. And we have both of those happening in the news. I mean, listen to Netanyahu. Any 10-second clip you hear of Netanyahu, he mentions security. And I don't actually think Netanyahu is the typical politician in that he says one thing and does another. Throughout his career, he's said, this is what it's about, and that's what it's about. And security is his number one priority. And he talks about security in the Middle East. That's what he's aiming for. That is why he's put troops on the ground in Gaza. That's why he made the economic reforms he did 20 years ago. He wants Israel's peace and security. And he's a bitter Joab figure. He's very talented, very capable, and he's been working on this for a long, long time. And he's developing that peace and security in the Middle East at the same time that Israel is consolidating control of the mountains of Israel. So it's a very significant time we're living in terms of this verse here, which is Ezekiel 38 and 39. That's the return of Christ, the visible return of Christ, where he saves Israel after Israel has lost to the Gogian host. So, we're talking about well beyond resurrection and judgment in that chapter. So it's really exciting to see us looking in the news at a chapter that talks about it, Christ and the saints, the immortalized saints, conquering Jerusalem from the Gogian host.
Yes, it's a good comment, Brother Glendon, and for sure, it's whatever you think of whatever your personal opinion is of Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu, you listen to what they're saying, because that is exactly what they mean and what they're intending to do. And it is Mr. Trump, I think, is a man of the times. He's put in there by God to bring about certain things, and whatever you feel about him personally, I think how God thinks is not how man thinks. And I think we have to know the difference and value the difference. And I think there's certainly a lot of Canadians right now have a fair bit of angst against Mr. Trump, but he's definitely a man of the hour, and as far as prophecy goes. And I think with that, we'll have to bring our session to a conclusion. And Brother Glendon, maybe I can get you to lead us with a word of closing prayer, please, when you're ready there.
Wonderful Heavenly Father, hallowed be your name. Thank you so much for the privilege of seeing your hand in the nations. We do realize that we live in very challenging times, and yet we also realize that you have given us such encouragement and confidence in our faith, the reassurance of our faith in the things that we're able to see and experience, and the wonderful ability to study your word of truth and to share the things therein that are encouraging with one another. Thank you for this hour of doing so. Pray that you would be with our young ones as well as they take the lessons, hopefully, that they've learned in Sunday school, and they might be as water to a seed that helps them grow up strong before you. Pray for forgiveness of our sins. Pray you continue to work with each one of us to bring our characters in alignment with that may be accepted at Christ's return. May it soon come. That you would give us comfort and reassurance and refresh our strength. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.